Well, the mandate has taken to the streets of D.C. They finally let us out of the studio, Peterson.
We escaped Dallas.
We have. And you know what? We're going to go through a couple different sites throughout the week here in Washington, D.C., but we thought it would be important to start right here outside of the steps of the Supreme Court. And there's been so much going on in Washington, D.C. lately. We actually had protesters that were out here earlier. They were hearing, there was a hearing about LGBTQ and whether you have the right to opt your children out of this in school or not. So we missed all the fun, unfortunately, from all the protesters, but there's still a lot of history that happens right here in this building.
Oh yeah, and I think there's going to be more fun to be had even today throughout this city, which is now all of a sudden, once again, feels completely different than it did before. I'm like a kid in a candy shop every time we come here now because there's so many interesting and good things happening everywhere you go.
So Professor Peterson, I am going to put you on the spotlight. We're going to go through and do a little bit of a history lesson. I want to start just with a brief overview of the Supreme Court and how it became, right? We all know the checks and balances for our federal government. How has this come to be what it is?
Yeah, so three branches of government. You have Congress, who makes the law. You have the executive, who executes the law, and then you have the courts, which are supposed to keep the basis of the rule of law in place in America. So the Supreme Court is there in Article 3 right away from the beginning in the Constitution. There's going to be one court at the top that's going to decide things. It'll be the decider. And the Supreme Court really, no one knew in the beginning what the Constitution was going to look like. That's the great thing about coming to Washington. You can actually see physically in the buildings the Constitution itself made manifest. It's not just a document. It's not an abstract idea or principle. It's actually written into the stone. So, what does the Supreme Court look like? We don't know until a guy named John Marshall. A lot of times people say he's the first Supreme Court justice. He's not, but he's the first influential member of the court who really makes it what it is today. And he establishes that the Supreme Court, yes, does have the power to rule over what the Constitution means. But that doesn't mean the executive also doesn't do that. Doesn't mean Congress should be doing that as well. That people take oaths to the Constitution. But the court becomes, a powerful institution that tries to be the arbiter, really, in constitutional disputes about what it means.
So how does it get all of the power that it then has?
Well, it's not the decider in the way we think of it today. It's almost become tyrannical, I think myself and a lot of other people on the right would argue, because a bunch of things happen. The first thing that happens is after the Civil War, they decide to incorporation, doctrine of incorporation. They take the Bill of Rights, which up to that time was not used in the way that it is today. It wasn't used in court cases the way it is today at all. And they say the Bill of Rights will be applied by the federal government to the states. So the states will have to abide by the Bill of Rights. And so all of a sudden, some weird things start to happen. And you see this happen over the course of the next 100 years after the Civil War in American history. And I'll give you an example of this, because this is really crazy when you think about it. If you just read the Constitution, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, right? So Congress shouldn't make a law respecting an establishment of religion, whatever that means. Somehow that is applied now to like small cities in America, in Pennsylvania, who put up a Christmas display. Did Congress make a law? No, it has nothing to do with Congress. There are no laws involved. And is there an establishment of religion? Did they establish a religion, federally by doing that? No, of course not. So you can see the mission creep of the Supreme Court start to grow. And
we see one state after another going through and putting the Ten Commandments back in classrooms, for example, right? They're trying to go through and make sure that they say, okay, well, we're actually going to go with what's written down in these documents and go with that law instead of whatever they just have decided over the few years. But let's go with the turning point. When do things change from the Supreme Court that you are talking about to the Supreme Court that we see now here today?
So a lot of people, even on the new right, it's a great question, miss this. I mean, they forget their history. And the history is that in the 60s and 70s, the court became what we call now the lefty activism that we're used to. That's when it really started. So Warren Court, you start to get in the 60s and 70s, a court that starts to talk about all kinds of cultural issues. It just didn't talk about cultural issues before. Like you weren't talking about, whether some town could legally, regulate the fact that there's strip clubs and say yes or no to them. You just weren't talking about that kind of stuff. In the 60s and 70s, you had all these cases where predominantly people on the left came in and they made everyone think that somehow the Supreme Court is the decider of everything, and it's supposed to tell you whether abortion is good or not and should be illegal or not. Which is, of course, that's the law. That should be an argument about what the law should be. The Supreme Court should not, in fact, be deciding these things. But most Americans today, because of the 60s and 70s of what happened and the power the court took over the last 100 years, most Americans today think the court decides a lot of things that it really shouldn't be deciding.
Well, let's bring this into current day, because I'll reference the sign that was just behind us here a few minutes ago when we started this.
Like right over
it
there.
said Supreme Coup.
Yeah.
Well, it's only a coup, I feel like, when the leftists don't get their way, right? If it's anything that they're making us subjected to their will, their whatever they wanted, it's not a coup. But when it's something that is done that benefits the right, they go through and say, "Oh, this is absolutely absurd. Nobody should have to go through this." So bring us in to the current day of the Supreme Court, because what we saw out here earlier today, that is not a one-off. That is what we see time and time and time again here outside of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so the protests are classic American. I mean, this is, by the way, we should be fair. Like, this was what happens. The case that we're talking about, they were saying that the Supreme Court is pulling a coup, is absolutely ridiculous. Jill can say more about it. But anytime you're against the other side in America, you say, that the president is a tyrant, right, if he's not on your side, and the Supreme Court is being tyrannical if he's not on your side. But what we have today is something that really is a problem. It's not just a matter of policy or what you think about one issue. The court has decided, as anyone who watches our show knows that we've been talking about for all these days, the court has decided that all the judges, federal judges throughout the land, that they can stop the executive from making executive determinations. And now there's some tension here that's normal and healthy, right? The courts should throw up blockages to the executive when the executive goes too far. But of course, but now they do it all the time. And with Trump, they've done it more than they've ever done it before. There's no other president who has had so many policies, so many decisions blocked by the courts. And you see that happening now when it comes to immigration. And it's a real problem because the court is saying you can't execute the laws, right? You can't execute the laws this way.
Well, let's bring this then into present day. The show is called The Mandate, after all. We're here to look at Trump versus the deep state, the administrative state. So what needs to happen going forward to make sure that this country that we love, that we're celebrating 250 years of very soon, that it actually gets back to its roots and is able to have potentially another 250 years going forward?
Well, first off, we need to have a really good time at the 250th anniversary celebration, which is coming up soon, and I think is really important for America, and it's going to be absolutely incredible. A lot of friends are working on that. I have high hopes. But what we have to do in one way is really simple, right? It's to get back to carve away all the stuff that's been added over the years to this Constitution and the buildings behind us. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court is very beautiful. It's covered today with all this stuff for construction, but that kind of reconstruction and construction is what we need throughout this town and this system. And the only way to do that is by peeling back the layers that have grown over the years that have rotted the system. So when it comes to the courts, Trump, the executive, has to push back hard against the egregious use of power that you see the Supreme Court taking on.
Well, the mandate takes on Washington, D.C. We'll be here going through for the rest of the week. We're gonna hit a couple of spots in town. They finally let us out of the studio, MP. We're excited.
Yeah, we're roaming. We're gonna be roaming this entire week, and we're gonna bring back some great stuff for all of you.